I hope the knitting odds will be ever in my favor because in this video I am reading the Hunger Games trilogy while I knit a top inspired by the Hunger Games. I will be conceptualizing the type of top that I want to knit, making a mock-up, picking out the yarn, and then knitting it while I read each book in the trilogy, and also while I watch the movies. I first read the Hunger Games as a teenager, just a few years after the first book came out in 2008, and I loved them. If you don't know, the Hunger Games is a YA series about a teenage girl named Katniss Everdeen who lives in a dystopia where they send their children to fight to the death and they televise it for entertainment. Obviously, the trilogy is covering some dark themes, so content warning for the general plot, although the books don't get very gruesome and neither will I. I will be sharing some spoilers throughout, but anytime I'm discussing a spoiler, I will let you know on the screen, and there's also chapters that you can skip through. The fifth book in the series, Sunrise on the Reaping, recently came out, and I will not be reading it in this video, although I do want to read it. It has compelled a lot of people to reread the trilogy, and so it's been fun to watch other people return to this trilogy and read it as an adult. And I can say the same for myself. This was so nostalgic, and I had such a great time coming back to one of my childhood faves. I've been sitting on this idea for a knit and lit series where I read a book and I knit something inspired by it. I love to read, I love to knit, I like to read while I knit, and it's such a simple concept, but it sounds really fun to me. And I'm so excited to finally be posting this video. I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, I would like to make more of these types of videos, so definitely let me know your thoughts. All right, let's go back to the beginning of May when I had longer hair and I was figuring out what I wanted to knit for this. While I reread the Hunger Games, I want to knit a summer top inspired by the series. When I was thinking about what I wanted to make, I knew that I didn't want to just recreate knitwear from the series. Like, obviously Katniss has that famous crossbody cowl thing, and I also knew that I didn't want to feature any iconography from the series, like the iconic Mockingjay, because I am not going to wear those things and I want to make something that I'm going to wear. So I decided to keep it pretty subtle, pretty basic, and just knit a t-shirt and stripe the colors from the book covers. So if you know, you know, and if you don't know, it's not going to look like I'm wearing a costume. Let's make a mock-up. Actually, I already made a mock-up, but let me show you how I did it. The first thing that I wanted to do was pull out the three main colors from each book in the trilogy. And you can see that white is one of the main colors for both the Hunger Games and Mockingjay. So that leaves us with 8 colors to work with. Once I chose my yarn, I wanted to figure out the stripe order. So you can see I went through several versions here. The first one was just what I thought looked good to my eye. Versions 2 and 3, I just tweaked it a little bit. And as I was walking up the t-shirt in this order, I just wasn't liking it. So I decided to kind of start over, and for version 4, I changed the way that I was thinking about this a little bit, and I decided to put the colors in order of the books. So we have black, gold, and white, the iconic colors of the first book, and then including that white, we have the white and the 2 reds for Catching Fire, and then the silver and the blue for Mockingjay. That's the order that I decided to fully mock up, and I'm really liking it so far. Let me show it to you. So to mock up the stripes, the first thing that I did was I pulled a few photos from Ravelry. One is the pattern photo right here on the right, and the left photo is somebody's project page where they had a very clear photo of their t-shirt version of the Arrow sweater. So that was really helpful. And at first I took one of the drawing tools from Canva and I turned the transparency so that it was about 95%. And then I just took my colors and I started drawing over the stripes. But ultimately I just wasn't getting a very clear picture of what I was going for. So then I thought, let me start over and use a line drawing so that I can get a better idea of my stripes. And here is my really amazing drawing of a t-shirt. And keep in mind, I'm doing this with a computer mouse. Here is my attempt at drawing the stripes. And this is in a different order than what I settled on, and this is what told me I wasn't liking my color order, but this is also what told me that I wasn't liking my method of mocking up. This was just very messy, and I just wasn't liking the way it was coming across. I wasn't excited about this. So that's when I was like, okay, stop trying to draw and instead create something with clean lines that isn't reflecting your poor drawing skills back at you, because I think that's all that I was focused on. So here's what I decided to do, and it's very simple, nothing revolutionary, but I just wanted to walk you through the process to get here, because even though this is like the most basic mock-up and probably what most people would just immediately go to, I started somewhere different. I went on a bit of a journey, and these things just take time. And I didn't want to just show you the finished version and be like, hey, it's super easy to mock something up. I know it's easy for me to look at other people's like beautiful drawings and they're just like, oh, I just did this in 5 minutes. And I don't know, I just don't work that way. This took me the better part of an afternoon. But anyway, I decided to use the lines function in Canva, and I just created a basic t-shirt. I added stripes to it and I put it in Paint in the stripe order that I'm pretty sure I'm gonna go with. I might have to make some adjustments at the shoulders, like where, you know, which stripe I start with, because I do want the black stripe to be closer to the top and then also like in the middle of the shirt. So depending on like my knitting gauge and where the stripes fall, you know, I might need to change that. But I think I'm gonna go with the black ribbing around the neck and the sleeves and the hem to kind of anchor all the colors together. Plus, it's the Hunger Games. Black is an essential color. It's about the revolution. So I wanted to use that to tie it all together. Okay, that's how I got there. That's my mock-up. I think it looks really good. I'm happy with my color order. I don't think it's screaming Hunger Games, but I think if you really looked at it, you could eventually tell what it's trying to do. And of course, if you know that it's supposed to be a Hunger Games shirt, I think it comes across that way. So at this point, I like where I'm going with this, and now I need to buy the yarn. From here, I went yarn shopping and I looked at any cotton, linen, viscose blend yarns that were in these colors. I think the colors I found are really close. I'm excited to see them in person to know for sure, but this is what I'm working with. So we've got 2 different yarns here. Both are linen cotton blends. One I've worked with and one I haven't. The one I've worked with is the Sandnes Garn 10 Lena, and I really like this yarn line. So I found 3 colors from that brand. And then I also found this Cascade Yarns cotton socks, which I've never worked with before. This one is just a cotton nylon blend, so I thought it would pair well, and they're all fingering weight. Now, the only thing that I'm missing is that brighter yellow from Catching Fire. So we've got the gold from Hunger Games, but then we've got this brighter yellow in Catching Fire. But I decided to keep the color palette a little bit simpler, especially because I have the 2 reds, and I feel like the 2 reds are more representative of Catching Fire than that yellow. And when I think of Hunger Games, I think of black, gold, red, and then of course the iconic Mockingjay blue. And then for my 2 neutral colors, I'm going with white because all of the text on the books is white, and the silver from Mockingjay. My yarn is here, and I brought the box set over so we can compare. First is the red and white. That's an easy one to match. The gold, I think, is pretty spot on to the first book, and I really like the way this Cascade Yarns cotton socks feels. I think the 2 reds are going to be perfect for Catching Fire. It's obviously not going to match exactly, but I think it's coming across here. Also, I could kind of tell this online, but it's nice to see it in person. For both of the reds, there is like a yellow core that comes through. You might be able to see it a little bit better on the darker one. It's very subtle, but it kind of represents the shiny, reflective surface of the hardcover, so I think that's really cool. And then for Mockingjay, such a pretty cover. The silver is just a basic silver, so that's gonna do the job. The blue is a little dark, especially compared to like the center of the book, it definitely matches the darker accents the best. So I need to think about this, and maybe I'll do some searching to see if I can find something that matches this a little bit better, but honestly, it's not too far off. So maybe I'll swatch it and that's how I'll make that decision. But honestly, for buying this yarn online, I think I got really close. So this was a big success, and now I get to do some swatching. I am so excited to get started. I have been waiting for this for over a month at this point. I have my book here. I'm so excited to read it. But before we get started, I do want to go over a couple of things. So I knit my swatch and I think it looks so good. I did decide to stick with the blue. I think altogether it matches the vibe. The lighting today is kind of horrible because it's raining outside, but hopefully you get the gist. I am changing the gauge of this pattern. Oh, let me talk to you about the pattern. So this is the Eros sweater by Petite Knit. The main reason I'm knitting this pattern is because I already own it. I have knit it once before, although I didn't stripe that sweater, but it just popped into my mind as a good base for a striped sweater or shirt. I looked at several different options, but ultimately came back to this one, and like I said, I already own it, so it just made sense. But the Eros sweater calls for a DK weight, and obviously I'm knitting mine in a fingering weight, so I just knit a swatch, took my gauge, and I'm knitting the size that will give me the measurements that I want with my gauge. So that means that I'm knitting the XL to fit as a medium or a 39-inch bust. And just for comparison, the pattern calls for a gauge of 5.25 stitches per inch and 7 rows per inch, and my gauge is 6.25 stitches per inch and 10 rows per inch. And of course, I'm doing mine as a short sleeve. And I actually already got started. I just did the first row to set up the increases just because that's going to be a little bit harder to do as I'm reading. But now that I'm all set up, I can actually get started on this. This is really what I want to be working on right now. And I finally get to start my reread, which I do have a lot of reading in my future. So as far as how the hours of knitting are going to match up with the hours of reading, honestly, I don't know. I haven't thought through that. We're just gonna figure it out as we go. Hopefully it matches up somewhat. I am a slower reader when I'm knitting while I read, but I'm also a slower knitter when I'm reading. I'm starting with the white, and this is my stripe sequence. All right, I think all that's left to do is get started, so let's do this. Oh, I forgot about Buttercup. Okay, I have both knitting updates and book updates. First, I finished a stripe sequence. So here's how this is looking so far. So I started with the white stripe and I've made it through all the colors and I'm back to the white. So the pattern is really just a standard top-down saddle shoulder construction. So you can see you start this strip of fabric here, and then you start increasing that into what becomes the sleeve caps. You're also increasing at both of the fronts here, and then you cast on some stitches to create the front of the neckline. And I just joined in the round here. So I'm kind of cruising on this so far. I've gotten to a point where it's a lot easier to knit and read at the same time. I'm definitely looking forward to not having any more increases to keep track of, but at this point there are only 4 increases every other round, so it's not that big of a deal to just stop and do the increase and then continue reading. One thing that does make it a little bit harder to read while I'm knitting though is that the Sandnes garn is very splitty, which is something that I already knew about because I've worked with this yarn before, but because I'm knitting without looking, I do find that I keep splitting the yarn and then I have to like stop reading and look at my stitch and fix it. Not that big of a deal, but just something to note. I am also weaving in my ends as I go. So I do have a few ends here because I joined on the wrong side. But for the most part, I have woven in all of my ends, and I'm using the technique where you wrap the tail as if you are catching a float, and then you knit the next stitch, and then you wrap the tail again as if you're catching a float. And you do that for just a couple of inches, and it really locks in your ends. I've tried the technique before where you weave in your ends by wrapping the end around the working yarn as you knit. That's the one that Stephen West popularized and called the Weave in Stephen. That one, I find your ends do start to weave themselves out over time. This one I feel really locks in the tails, and I feel a lot more confident to just snip those ends. And you can see from the right side, so all along here, I've woven in my ends, and you really can't tell at all. So this is really going to save me so that I don't have a billion ends to weave in at the end of this. But I do have a couple ends to weave in, and that's because with the Sandnes garn, I decided to add an extra round to the stripes because the Sandnes garn is a little bit thinner than the Cascade cotton socks. I would say the cotton socks is a true fingering and the Tenlina is a light fingering. And I just felt like to get the stripes to visually look the same width, I needed to add just one extra round. So for the white, the blue, and the black, I'm doing 7 round stripes, and for the rest I'm doing 6 round stripes. But that meant that I did need to join a new color on the wrong side when I was still knitting flat. And I just left those ends, and I'll just go back and weave them in. So the knitting is going well. I really like the colors together, and it is definitely looking like the Hunger Games to me. As far as a book update, it is going really well. I have made it to chapter 5, so I am that far in. I am 60 pages in, and it's just really good. The writing is pretty simple, a lot of short sentences, which really was the style for this type of YA fiction at the time. It probably still is. I don't know, I haven't read any recent YA, but it's very nostalgic to read. And so far there has just been some world building and introducing us to all the characters. Katniss and Peeta have just made it to the capital, and they are trying to figure out how to get Haymitch to actually help them, and also just like generally how not to die and what their plan is. And Katniss is trying to figure out like if she can trust anyone. I also really appreciate the characterization so far. We've been introduced to quite a few different characters, and we've only interacted with them in a few scenes each, but already I feel like I have such a clear idea of who everyone is. And obviously we're gonna figure out like what their true motives are and who they'll become as far as the broader story. I would say most of it I remember, but there are quite a few details that I totally forgot about. One of them is just how many cameras there are. Obviously the games are televised, and I remember reading about Katniss just thinking about the, zoomed in camera that was presumably on her face like at all times. But even as far back as when they're picking the tributes in District 12, like from the very start, she's aware that cameras are on her and she has to keep a very neutral face and not let people know what she's thinking or feeling. That read as much more ominous to me today than I remember it back in 2010 or 2012 whenever I read the books. This one came out in 2008, and I think I read it just a few years after it came out. But yeah, just thinking about cameras in today's society and how ubiquitous they are. And I mean, I'm literally in front of a camera right now, but I am controlling it and I'm choosing to film myself. But I think I had forgotten, or maybe it just wasn't as much of an impact to me back then, just how often Katniss is being filmed and how she really just has no privacy from the very start. This is making me want to rewatch the movies. I think it's because the movies were such a big part of my childhood that I really can't picture the characters as anyone else but the actors who play them. I really can't remember how I pictured the characters when I was first reading this before the movies came out. So the actors themselves are just locked into my brain, and that's who I'm seeing as I'm reading, and it's really making me want to rewatch the movies. Like Effie Trinket is Elizabeth Banks in my mind. Haymitch is Woody Harrelson. So I'm having a really fun time so far. And now that I have sort of a baseline as far as how much I can knit and how much I can read and how those two things match up, I am thinking a bit more about how many hours of reading I have ahead of me, as well as knitting hours. Knitting is a little bit harder to predict. I would say I probably spend about 40 hours on a sweater, and because this one doesn't have sleeves, I'll probably spend 30 hours. But I did look up how many hours the audiobooks are so that I can get kind of a sense of how many hours it will take me to read. I am probably a little bit of a faster reader than the audiobooks, but in total, the trilogy is 36 hours. So right there, just reading the trilogy is probably about where I'll be when I finish the shirt. So I might do some reading without knitting to get ahead a little bit so that I can watch the movies while I knit. And the movies are long. I forgot how long they were, so I looked them up. The first and second movie are both 2 hours and 26 minutes exactly. Kind of weird that they're both that length. So that's already 5 hours, and Mockingjay is split up into two parts. The first part is 2 hours and 3 minutes, and the second part is 2 hours and 17 minutes. So that's another over 4 hours right there, and that's just the movies. So maybe I could have planned like a movie rewatch for this instead, but there's no way that I was going to be rewatching the movies without reading the books first. I could also be off on my knitting time prediction. It might take me longer than 35 hours. Either way, I'm just gonna keep going, and no matter what happens at the end of this, I'm gonna have my finished Hunger Games top and I'm gonna have finished the trilogy. So those are the updates that I have for you now. I will be back when I have more updates. I just made it to chapter 20. I am this far. This is like just past part 3 that's called The Victor. So I am nearing the end, and honestly I don't want it to end, but at least I know I have the next book. And here's where I'm at with the top. So I've made it to another blue stripe, and I am 2 increase rounds away from finishing this first section before I split for the sleeves. So once I do that, this will be a lot easier to work on, because right now I have it on too small of a cable, which like I could just change the cable, but I'm a little bit stubborn, and since I'm so close now, I'm just gonna stick with it and split the sleeves, and then it'll get a lot easier to knit on. But I'm having so much fun with it. I love knitting stripes, and weaving in the ends as I go is still the way for me. I had forgotten, so I've knit this pattern once before, and I forgot that this second section of increases are increases that you do on every single row, so there aren't any rest rows. And it starts to get a little tight. I am definitely ready to be done knitting increases on every single round. It's not that it's hard, it just definitely pulls the fabric in, but I know that once you're done with the yoke and once you block it and everything, it all evens out. As far as the book, so I am going to share some spoilers. It's just going to be hard to avoid doing that since I am reading the entire trilogy. If I'm going to be talking about a major spoiler, I will wrap the video in this text so that you know that I'm spoiling it, just in case you haven't read it and you still want to watch this video. So I had forgotten how both Katniss and Peeta end up winning together. I knew that they both made it out, but I couldn't remember if it was something that Katniss did, if she had like outsmarted the game makers and gave them an ultimatum or something like that. I just couldn't remember how it happened. And the actual way that it happens was a little bit anticlimactic. Like obviously we don't see what's happening on the side of the game makers. We're just seeing it through Katniss's perspective. It happens all of a sudden. They make the announcement that 2 tributes can win if they're both from the same district. And it's pretty obvious that this means that the audience is rooting for Katniss and Peeta, and that's why they make that decision. but Katniss doesn't have any other insight into that. And so as the reader, we just have to accept it and keep going. But I guess that's why I had forgotten that that's how it happened, because it just seemed like, okay, this is what we're doing now. You can both win if you survive. Anyway, I think my favorite part of this book has definitely been the initial stages where Katniss is trying to figure out how to survive and trying to outsmart the careers. Her teaming up with Rue and forming that bond. I mean, that's probably my favorite part of the book. Obviously, Rue reminds her of Prim, and it's also like, how can you not look at this child who is very smart and is just like trying her best and making it really far and not want to work with her and try to get her to win? But I think we got all the right moments to really build that and support this bond between the two of them, which makes her death like so tragic. And I did like her death scene and the way that Katniss responded and, you know, tried to honor her and send a message to District 11 and all of that. But I feel like it happened so fast. And I know that this is a YA, and so it needs to be quick paced and just easy to like get through it. But I love the ways that Katniss and Rue worked together and shared their knowledge to basically outsmart everyone else. I just made it to the point where she's found Peeta and she's trying to heal him, and she's figuring out how she can get both of them to survive. It's very fun to read, very quick to read. I think I read most of the book. I read most of part 2 in like a day. I mean, and if I had the time to just sit and read, I would probably read the entire book just in one sitting. And I think I'm gonna finish the rest of this very quickly and get started on the next one. But yeah, I've been very impressed with this book. It's just as good as I remember. The writing is excellent. And I'm just so happy that so far, at least, The Hunger Games has really held up for me. So I'm just gonna keep knitting, separate for the sleeves. That's gonna get a little bit smoother for me, and probably finish this book up really quickly. Okay, I have thoughts. I finished the first book. It didn't take long. I loved it. It was just as good as I remember, if not even better. So I just want to go through some things that I loved about this book. First, I loved Katniss being the main character, being in her head. She's a very independent and strong person, but doesn't necessarily fully know that about herself, I don't think. So we get her unfiltered perspective. And I remember at the time thinking that the present tense writing, because this entire book is written from Katniss's perspective only, and it's written in present tense. I remember thinking that that was such a like cliche when I was reading it. It was sort of a trend at the time to write first person present tense YA novels, and I don't know, I was probably just a pretentious teenager, but I just remember not loving that choice and thinking that the author chose it because everybody was doing it. But rereading it, I really liked it. I do have some like rhetorical reasons that I didn't love it, because I think it just limits our perspective as the reader. But as far as what it does to the tone, the pacing, building Katniss's character, just setting the scene, I think it's totally the right choice for this style of book. I love Peeta. I'm Team Peeta all the way. Although in my mind, there's not like a Peeta versus Gale, because who would like Gale? But that is like another, wait, I'm gonna stop holding the book. But that is another small critique I have. I would have loved to have gotten Peeta's perspective, maybe a few scenes from his perspective in the games, or even just his like backstory a little bit more. Cinna, I love Cinna, bless Cinna. Cinna was the perfect confidant to Katniss. He immediately gained her trust and is just a very like warm and genuine person who actually cares about other people, while ultimately doing his job really well to help Katniss succeed. I don't think there's another character who Katniss meets from the Capitol who is even thinking about what it might be like to visit the Capitol and see how these people live from an outsider's perspective, especially from a perspective of somebody who has lived her entire life impoverished. And I don't think that Cinna is meant to be sympathetic as far as like, oh, not everyone in the Capitol is greedy and awful. Because I don't think that we really need to even explore that idea. I think Cinna is just there purely for Katniss to just have somebody that she can talk to and trust. She can't really trust Haymitch. She can't really trust Peeta. She's so confused about like all of these people in her life who, you know, she has to act around. But Cinna is there to just ground her and remind her that she's a human being and she deserves to be treated that way. Another thing I really liked is that not only is this book like a major criticism of fascism, but it brings this other factor of performance into it, where you have to act like a person you're not and pull that off so that these people who you deeply detest will like you. Having to perform while you are literally dying, knowing that the quality and believability of your performance is the thing that's going to influence the people who could ultimately save you, like that is so bleak. And you know, I don't want to prescribe like more meaning and depth to this book than it actually has. It's pretty surface level, it's pretty straightforward. Like I don't think that it's trying to get you to think super deeply about all of these concepts, but obviously it's saying something, right? And there is a message, and just at face value, like it is a critique of a fascist government, and it is portraying a rebellion of a people against the powers that are keeping them down. Which makes me think of Rue as a character and the addition of her character. I think as I have sat with it, I wish that we would have seen more of her. In the moment, I felt like we got enough details between the connection of Katniss and Rue to like feel a little bit like we got to know her. But similarly to Peeta, I just feel like she's kind of there and we don't get a whole lot about her. But thinking about like why she exists in this story, again, this might be thinking too deeply about it, but I think that what she represents is all of the people who are forced to participate in these games who never stood a chance, but who are smart and skilled and outside of the context of this society that's been built so that certain people have so many more resources than other people. Like outside of that, she would have stood a chance. If it was a level playing field, she represents the type of people that could win the games. So I think her character is some sort of like overarching commentary on the fact that where you're born, like which district you're born into, plays a huge part in how likely you are to make it out alive. And if someone from one of the lower districts ends up winning, it's because they worked their ass off and they played it right to get the right people to like them, basically, not because they're starting on equal footing. And that's like the whole point of the games, right? This society is built around the unfairness of inequality. I also liked that Katniss has a moment towards the end of the games where she starts to realize that she is not actually mad at the other competitors who are trying to kill her. She reassigns her anger towards the game makers because those are the people who are ultimately responsible for why she's in this situation. She realizes that there's a larger plot here, and the people, like especially the careers who are the competitors who have like spent their whole lives training and been given, you know, all the money and resources that they need to prepare for this, those are not necessarily the people who are responsible for the games. They probably contribute to it, you know, their families seem like they condone it, like they are part of the problem, but they're not like ultimately the reason why it happens. So I thought that was interesting. Again, like the book doesn't say anything more than that. It's not giving you like all of these things to think about, but it's just kind of covering these various things that come up for these characters. What else did I want to say? I liked that we got a reference to Haymitch winning the games and like kind of some insight into how that happened, because 17 years later, we get his Hunger Games backstory. So now that I've told you about the book, here's where I'm at with my top. It's really coming along. I'm having so much fun with it. I think it looks so good. I'm probably about halfway on the body. I really like the sequence that I chose for the stripes. I think it was a great decision to just stick with the color combinations that, you know, a graphic designer came up with and not try to like do my own thing with it, because I'm not a graphic designer. So I am a full sequence of stripes into the body, and I just started on my next blue stripe, so I'm starting the next sequence and I'm having a great time. I love fingering weight garments. Call me crazy, but I just love the way they knit up. Now, the reason that I'm so far into my top is that I watched the first movie. It took me a while to find the time to have a free night to watch it because it's 2.5 hours long. But I had so much fun. I made some popcorn and I knit on my top and it was the best. It was so nostalgic. Like, rereading the book has been nostalgic. Watching the movie, oh my God. The way that side braid had such a hold on me, especially like the Dutch braid where it's like a crown around your head, and her leather jacket, like, ugh, I wanted a leather jacket so badly. Okay, also the shaky cam, I totally forgot about it, and it is so prominent in this movie. It was another thing that was just a style for a lot of movies at the time, but I was reading that another reason they wanted to use it was to obscure some of the violence that's happening, because we're watching children try to kill each other in a movie. So they didn't want it to be like R-rated because it is YA, but I think also like a lot of people probably just don't want to like directly see that on the screen. So even though I kind of hate shaky cam, like, I understand why it was used. The additional scenes I found very interesting because this is sort of what I was getting at with only being in Katniss's perspective in the book and feeling like I was missing out on the broader context and just understanding like what's happening outside of the games and all of that. Like, in the movie, we got quite a bit of insight into that. There were several additional scenes with the game maker, and we got to hear his take on things and like why he was making certain decisions. We got to see the camera control room, which I thought was a really cool addition. I liked that a lot. That really hit home the fact that there are people behind these cameras controlling the cameras and also controlling what happens within the games, and basically trying to kill people, trying to make it harder for them to survive. Very uncanny and very chilling. We also got some commentary of the games, which again just tells us kind of how other people were perceiving the games as they were happening, what people were thinking of Katniss when obviously she couldn't have known that. Also being able to see their families watching, or specifically Katniss's family, and see Gale watching, you know, Katniss and Peeta in the games together. I think that just added some needed context to Catching Fire, the second book, to kind of understand like why people reacted the way they did. So I liked all of that. I am gonna get into a spoiler real quick. So spoilers if you're not watching but you're just listening. I loved that they added a scene of the police brutality happening in District 11. Again, this is something that is sort of hinted at or implied in the book, but it is no way talked about because Katniss just simply doesn't know about it. But that scene of District 11 right after Rue was murdered was just so violent and so heart-wrenching, and it was just kind of thrown in there because there's not really a story of District 11 yet, but that's just what's happening alongside the games. But I think that was another good way to show how violent this society is and just like how much violence is condoned and kind of accepted. Not necessarily accepted by the lower districts, but it's just like a part of this country. Is Panem a country or is it a continent? I think it's a country. But yeah, just like the violence that was portrayed, I mean, those peacekeepers were ready to kill as soon as anyone pushed back. So I thought all of those extra scenes just added a lot, and that was sort of the context that I felt like was missing from the first book. Some things I didn't like though about the movie. I don't think it is like a great movie, but I do think it's a really good adaptation because they did include a lot. But something I found kind of lacking just right after reading the book and then watching the movie was the Capitol itself. Obviously it was like grand and all of that, but I just wasn't like wowed like I expected to be. They did a good job like contrasting, you know, how colorful the Capitol is compared to District 12, and they did a good job making the Capitol feel very weird and like otherworldly. Obviously, we're supposed to think that District 12 are like the regular people and the Capitol are like the super rich, the self-obsessed, the status-obsessed, the socialites, like all of that. But I didn't quite believe the wealth I don't know. There was something about it that seemed a little bit cheap to me. And that's probably just because this movie had half the budget that the rest of the movies had. So I'm not necessarily knocking it for that. I just had those thoughts as I was watching it. I think Jennifer Lawrence and Josh Hutcherson were great. The guy who plays Gale, what's his name? Liam Hemsworth. I don't know. I forgot that. He just gave me the ick. Not that he's in it very much, but I think I just hate Gale. All in all, though, I think it was an extremely successful book to movie adaptation. It was an adaptation that kind of favored book fans, I think, just because it really stayed true to the book. And there really wasn't a major thing that they changed, I don't think. Loved watching it, can't wait to watch the rest. But I'm going to keep yapping because I have started catching fire. So that's why I wore my red shirt today. And I'm already 50% of the way in. I'm on chapter 15. Sorry, I didn't update you sooner and take you along. I didn't necessarily mean to do that. I have just been reading this. I can't put it down. Also, I went camping and was reading a lot of it while I was camping, and I just didn't really want to take my camera. So I'm halfway in now. This book, I think in some ways is better than the first one. I remember really liking it, but I actually forgot a lot about what was in it. So I don't think it's a spoiler to say that both Katniss and Peeta make it out of the games alive. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the series. So they're both back in District 12. They have their houses. They're getting paid a lot of money, like they're rich. And things should be kind of settling down for them, right? Like they won, they made it out. Now they just want to be left alone and get back to their lives. But that is not how things work out for them because they have to do their victory tour, which is where they go to all the districts, starting with the lowest district and ending with their district, and like greet people and do speeches and I don't know, just visit them. And this is where Katniss begins to understand that she is fueling some unrest. When Katniss gets home, Gale is pretty cold to her. I hate Gale, okay? I've never liked Gale. If you like Gale, you should probably just fast forward through this section. He comes across like a nice guy to me. He doesn't seem like he loves Katniss. Like, to me, Peeta loves Katniss, Katniss loves Gale. Gale doesn't love either of them. He comes across like he kind of feels like he owns Katniss rather than he loves her and he just wants what's best for her. And I do understand where he's coming from. It would be very hard to be in his position watching Katniss and Peeta, you know, pretend like they're in love, especially when you can tell that like Peeta is actually in love. But like, dude, come on. Like, Katniss had to do what she had to do or she wasn't gonna come back home. Like, she already was leaving to go murder people. So pretending to be in love with this guy, like, to me is ranked pretty low as far as like things that I would have a problem with. But anyway, he's jealous and he doesn't like the way that Katniss acted. He doesn't know where they stand, but neither does Katniss because everything in her world has been turned upside down. She's confused about everything. She just wants to kind of go back to her normal life and not have to think about the influence of the Capitol. She is realizing that she and Peeta have kind of sparked this uprising among a lot of the lower districts, kind of non-intentionally. Like, she was really just trying to survive and make it out alive. Her Mockingjay and a few other things that she did during the games have really become a symbol of rebellion against the Capitol. So she is finding herself in this position where she has to like play a part. She has to pretend to be in love with Peeta, but she really just wants Gale. She's visited by President Snow because he is kind of coming to intimidate her and tell her that she has to like really play the part. Otherwise, she is going to be the reason that all these districts rebel and they're going to start murdering her family. So she has all this pressure and Peeta is like kind of being weird to her because he can tell that she doesn't love him. I just feel really bad for Peeta. Like, it's pretty obvious that he loves her. And one thing is, like, I don't feel like they really know each other, but anyway, he loves her. I'm gonna do some knitting while we chat because it's here and I want to. So he truly cares about her and she doesn't love him back, but he's like the only other person who understands what she went through in the games. So they sort of have this bond and she kind of relies on him to be there for her. And he like understands what that really means. Like, he knows that doesn't mean that Katniss loves him back. So it's a tough situation. This is all leading up to what is called a quarter quell, which means that every quarter out of each 100 years of the game, they change it up. They do something different. They put on an event. The year that Haymitch was in the games was also a quarter quell, and they doubled the amount of tributes. This quarter quell, they have decided to bring previous tributes back, and those people have to fight in the Hunger Games again. With Katniss being the only woman from District 12 who has won, she has to go back to the games. So that's what the rest of the book is about. I just made it to that part where they announced this quarter quell, and Katniss and Peeta and Haymitch are all like training and trying to prepare somewhat for doing it all over again. Prepare for their deaths, basically. The first book, I physically read the whole thing, and for Catching Fire, I am doing a combination of reading and listening, and I'm really liking it so far. I think I like it more than the first book, which I didn't expect to, but I think Suzanne Collins just got a little bit better, I guess, at writing and developing these characters and this, you know, all the world building. Although Catching Fire was published like 1 year after the Hunger Games, which I don't know, I was a little bit surprised by. So I'm gonna keep knitting and get back to reading, and I'll see you when I finish the book. I finished the book and I watched the movie and I had a good time. It was fun. The second half of the book is all about the game, and I can't say much about it without spoiling it, so I'll just say that the game is a little bit different this time around. There is a theme this year, so it's not just trying to stay alive and kill your opponents. There are some logistical things about the way the game works that you have to figure out. And right off the bat, a lot of the tributes decide to team up because many of them know each other and have been around in the capital for many years. And during training, of course, Katniss decides to team up with people who Haymitch doesn't think that she should team up with. He's pushing a couple of people, including a character named Finnick, who I think is from District 4 or maybe 3. So he becomes a character, and there are a few others from several different districts who Katniss teams up with. So we get to know them, and we learn just a little bit more about kind of what their life is like in other districts. But really, the book is just focused on the game itself, and it ends on a huge cliffhanger, which I did remember, so it wasn't a surprise to me, but I do think it's a pretty satisfying ending. It is a cliffhanger that you kind of wanted to happen, or at least I did when I remember reading about it, because we get to explore something that is hinted at and mentioned a couple of times throughout the trilogy, but seems a little bit too good to be true. So that leads us into Mockingjay. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about the movie really quick because I really liked the movie. I could definitely tell the budget was much higher for this movie than the first one. And I feel like the game in Catching Fire really played well on the screen. It just made a lot of sense to watch it happen, and there was less like inner monologue that we needed to get in order to explain what was happening. Like, because the characters are figuring things out as they go, they can just explain it to each other and then we understand it as the audience. So I liked it a lot. I thought it was a really fun, entertaining movie. It was fast-paced. I have two things to say about kind of both of the movies in general, and that'll probably be it as far as what I say about Catching Fire, the movie, because it just is so similar to the book that I don't have a lot more to say. But two things. Okay, so the first is that I have maybe a slightly controversial take on book to movie adaptations as a reader. I took a movie adaptation class in college, and through that class learned some of the ways that filmmakers make decisions about what they're going to adapt and how they're going to translate a book onto the screen. And I just view them as two separate mediums. Like, to me, they're just not the same experience whatsoever. So my hot take is that I don't mind when the movie is quite a bit different from the book, because I just view them as two separate entities. And yes, it is frustrating when you read a really good book and then you watch the movie and they changed everything for the worse. But I tend to go into my movie experiences just expecting something different, because it's a different medium, it's made by different people, they have an interpretation of the book, and I don't think that filmmakers always need to adapt the book one for one. But so far, at least in the trilogy, the movies have been very faithful to the books. There's been a few different changes. I thought it was funny that they tried to make Gale a little bit more sympathetic when they were in District 12, when he's being beaten by the Peacemaker. He is, in the movie, he's defending like an older woman. And in the book, he's getting punished just for hunting. But anyway, so given that I don't necessarily care if movies stay faithful to the book, I wonder what these movies could have turned out like if they had strayed a little bit more. I don't know if it would have been better. It probably wouldn't have, but I'm just curious, because this leads me into my second point about these movie adaptations, which is something that I brought up, I think at the start of this video when I was reading the first book. Katniss has a ton of inner monologue, and that is the primary literary device that is moving us forward. We hear all of her thoughts, we get to find out exactly what kind of person she is, what she's thinking at all times, and this is really important in the books because she is often acting as a completely different person, right? As a character for the Capitol. But she's also just trying to figure it out as she goes. So she has a lot of confusion and questions and thoughts about how she should act and what she should say. And I remember thinking when I was reading the first book that I couldn't remember how they portrayed that in the movie, and I wasn't sure how that was going to translate. And ultimately, I just don't think it does. I don't think that they were able to capture her inner dialogue and show us that as movie viewers. It almost made me wonder what the movies would be like if Katniss had a voiceover, which again is probably a controversial thing to say because I know a lot of people hate voiceovers. I don't necessarily love them, but I think when they're done well, they work. I don't know that it would have worked with the movies, but I am a bit disappointed by Katniss's character on screen because I kind of feel like she comes across as a little dumb. In the books, I think to other people she might come across that way, but we are in her head, so we know that the way she's acting is strategic and it's an act. And of course, we can glean this while we're watching the movies, and we can understand based on context that of course she is just doing what she's told and is trying to keep up this act, but we don't see much of her intelligence. And that was a big part of what I like about the books, is just getting to hear her think through everything and try to figure things out. So obviously we have 2 more movies to go with part 1 and part 2 of Mockingjay, but it is the same director of Catching Fire. So I don't expect there to be too big of a difference in the way that he directed these movies. I really don't remember Mockingjay, the movies, at all. I had to take a little break, but I'm back now. Hopefully able to capture the rest of the sunlight. So I think that's all I have to say about Catching Fire. I really liked it. I think it's my favorite movie so far, but I still like the first book the best. I have started Mockingjay, so I will get to that in a moment, but first I want to show you where I'm at with my knitting. I'm getting very close, and I have been doing some reading without knitting just to try to match up my knitting and reading a bit better. And there's where I'm at. It is looking so close to full length. I haven't measured, but now I want to. Okay, I'm just gonna do a quick and dirty measure. It's not gonna be the most accurate. I like just about reached 11 inches under the arms. Full length on me with a fitted arm side is usually like between 11 and 13 inches. So I actually might want to call it. I might want to try it on to see where the length is hitting me. I actually meant to try this on a while ago, like when I split for the underarms, I meant to try this on, and I've just got so caught up in knitting it while I was reading that I haven't been thinking about this as much as I typically do with my knitting. It's really just been a kind of brainless activity while I'm reading. So hopefully it fits. It looks like it will. So, but yes, before I continue knitting, I am going to try this on to check for length. I probably want to add an inch or two more, but I do want the ribbing to take up some of that length. So I'm getting very, very close. I'm going to keep the sleeves pretty short as well. And I have a lot of reading left to do on Mockingjay. I'm probably going to read ahead a little bit and then get back to the knitting because I do still want to watch both of the movies for Mockingjay. Okay, so my thoughts on Mockingjay so far. I am about 25% of the way in. I'm on chapter 7, and I feel like it's exactly what you would expect having read the end of Catching Fire. There are going to be some light spoilers. I won't be spoiling anything major, but it's sort of spoilers for like the trilogy as a whole. But I'm only going to tell you what is in the like dust jacket. So again, spoilers for like the trilogy, but not spoilers for the book Mockingjay. So I'm not that far in. I actually don't remember much about Mockingjay. I remembered more of Catching Fire, but for whatever reason, I just don't remember exactly what happens. This is a lot of people's least favorite of the trilogy, and I think I find myself in that boat as well. Can I say that it's a little bit boring so far? The plot of this book up to this point is kind of exactly what you would think. District 12 has been destroyed. There is a District 13. Katniss and Katniss's family and Gale are all in District 13 now, as well as some of the other tributes that they pulled from the game. And it turns out that Plutarch, the game maker, has been on District 13's side. He is against the Capitol, and they have been planning this rebellion all along. And now Katniss is positioned to be the face of this rebellion, to be the Mockingjay. We don't know where Peeta is. Well, we know where he is. He's at the Capitol. He was captured because the rebel group or District 13 wasn't able to get him out. And he is sort of in an unknown state. It seems like maybe he's being blackmailed or being tortured or made some sort of deal with the Capitol so that he can remain alive. But he is calling for a ceasefire. And the rebellion, of course, is very against that idea. So we learn about District 13. It is very regimented to keep everyone alive. And in certain ways, it is even more controlling than District 12 was for Katniss. She's not allowed to hunt. She has to stay underground. She has to follow the rules. And none of those things are really her cup of tea. But she's with Gale. She's with her family. Like, people up to this point are safe. She's able to negotiate a little bit with Plutarch and the others to try to get what she wants out of this deal. But ultimately, she does agree to be the Mockingjay. I think what is kind of boring about it for me is that everything has already been figured out for the most part. Like, this has been going on for a long time, well before Katniss volunteered to be in the games, and it sort of just happened that the timing worked out so that Katniss could be the face of this rebellion. But District 13 had kind of been planning this for a while, and it sort of feels like the plot so far, or the conflict that we're dealing with, is not really the rebels against the Capitol. Right now, it's Katniss against District 13 because they're so overbearing and they're asking her of all of these things, and she doesn't really know if she actually wants to be the Mockingjay. Like, she's sort of just doing it because she thinks that will be the best deal in the end, and also because she does hate the Capitol. She hates President Snow. But kind of like the rest of the trilogy, I don't know that her heart is really in it, you know? She sort of just ended up in this position. And I think as a reader, like, it makes sense that this is the plot and everything so far has been written well. We're seeing most of the things that we want to see. We're learning how District 13 survived. We are getting snippets of Peeta. We're getting snippets of Cinna. We're watching Katniss kind of try to gain power so that she can protect, you know, the people that she cares about. So we're getting all the things that make a good story. I think I just am finding myself not super invested in this for some reason. And I'm only 25% of the way through, so I will check in once I have gotten further into it, and we'll see if that's still the case. And in the meantime, I think the best thing for me to do right now is try on my top and see where we're at. So I'm going to slide half of the stitches onto another needle and try this on with what little sunlight I have. Okay, good news. It fits perfectly. This was definitely the right size for me. And the length is almost there. So I think I might add a couple more stripes and then I'll start the ribbing. I just changed out of my real pants for the day, so you'll have to excuse the lounge shorts. But it's like almost there. The shoulders fit really nicely and the sleeves are like the perfect circumference. It's not too loose in the back, which can sometimes be a problem with the bust in the front. But yeah, I think it's great. Just needs a little bit of length. And then I'll probably add some length to the sleeves as well. Not a whole lot, just maybe a stripe or two, and then the ribbing. I'm almost done with another stripe. And I just finished chapter 14 and I looked it up. This is where the first part of the Mockingjay movie ends. And I thought it might be fun to watch the first movie now that I've read everything up to this point and break it up so that I will finish reading the second half and then watch part 2. So that's what I'm going to do tonight. And I'm pretty excited because, as I mentioned earlier, I don't remember a lot in general from Mockingjay, and I especially don't remember much of the movies. So I'm hoping for the best, and I will be knitting while watching. I still haven't decided exactly how much length I'm going to add, but I'm going to figure that out before I start the movie so that once I reach that, I can just start the ribbing. And I did mention this at the beginning of this video, but I'm going to be knitting all of the ribbing in the black yarn. So that's where I'm at. That's the plan. I was struggling a little bit with this book at the start. It wasn't bad by any means. I just wasn't like super invested in it, which felt weird because obviously I'm invested in the entire story. But I think we just got to District 13 and things kind of slowed down, and I wasn't a huge fan of the way that District 13 was described. I think I was just expecting a little bit more from it, and it left me feeling a bit disappointed. But now things are starting to pick up again. The Capitol is bombing District 13. Luckily, they are set up for it, and so everyone's okay. But clearly things are heating up. And PETA is really in the middle of that because he is being televised and he tries to warn them about the first bombing. So because of him, everyone is still alive, but obviously Katniss is quite worried about him and just wondering what is going on. In addition to that, the rebel group is still trying to get out as much information about what's happening to the rest of the districts as they can by hacking the Capitol's media to like display what's going on. There have been quite a few different like inner political things happening amongst the group, especially with Katniss being the Mockingjay and just her pushing back on things that they want her to do, or just feeling uneasy about some of the like marketing tactics that they want her to use. Like things just feel a little bit off. And there's also this undercurrent of, impending doom about what Snow is going to do. Katniss and Gale are kind of struggling a little bit to like trust each other and understand each other. Gale has withheld some information from Katniss to try to protect her. And of course, Katniss views that as a violation of her trust. And so they're kind of trying to figure out things between the two of them. There's also this subplot of Plutarch Heavensbee and the president of District 13 and everyone involved with the rebel group keeping things from Katniss. They're clearly devising a plan, but they don't want Katniss to know everything because she is their Mockingjay. She's their face of what's happening to everyone else in District 13. And there's a moment when they suspect that a bomb is coming and they are all going deep underground for protection. when Plutarch turns to Katniss and he's like, hey, you gotta be extra calm because everyone else is looking at you. And if you're freaking out, then they're gonna freak out too. Meanwhile, she is internally freaking out about what we've just seen happen with Peeta. So she's like, what the hell, dude? Like, I am freaking out. So we get the sense that they are withholding information from her. We find out that they did intentionally withhold information about Peeta's condition so that she wouldn't get upset or like refuse to cooperate with them. So there's definitely some stuff going on that we are not really privy to because Katniss doesn't know about it, and so we only know as much as Katniss knows. Part 1 of Mockingjay does end on a cliffhanger, but I am a little bit surprised just based on reading half of the book so far that they decided to split the movie in 2 parts. I don't feel like they have enough material so far within the plot to make a compelling movie, but I'm not gonna prejudge it. I'm gonna try to go in with an open mind, and I'm excited to watch it. Just sat down to start Mockingjay. First impressions, it is quite slow, although that is what I thought of the book. Also, long live Buttercup. You know what? I didn't hate it. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it since it's just part 1, but I do have a few thoughts that I will share. And here's where I'm at on my top. I made it to the yellow stripe. There was a point in the movie towards the end when I stopped knitting because it was pretty late at that point and I was quite tired. But I feel like that is a decent amount of progress to have gotten done. And I think I'm getting very close to adding the bottom ribbing. In fact, I kind of want to add it after the yellow stripe. I just don't know if the black stripe being so close to the ribbing is going to look kind of weird, or if it's going to be fine because all of the ribbing will be in black yarn. The thing is, since the sleeve ends at the very beginning of the blue stripe, I could do the same thing where I knit blue, black, yellow, and like finish that out on the sleeves and then do the black ribbing so that it all matches. Or I could finish the blue stripe and then start the ribbing after that stripe. I think I just need to decide how long of sleeves I want. I do like that at the neckline, the black stripe is going to match up with the black ribbing here. I think that's going to look nice. So I just need to figure out what's going to look nice for the hem and the sleeves. So what I'll do is continue working on the yellow stripe while I read Mockingjay, and then I'll pause and make a decision on what I want to do with the ribbing. I might try it on again just to see where it's hitting me, and I will figure it out from there. But I'm excited that I'm so close to being done with this. I think it's kind of funny that I devoted this much time to knitting a shirt inspired by the Hunger Games, but you know what? I'm reliving some teenage nostalgia and I'm having a great time. So I think it was a good idea to split up the book by watching part 1 in the middle of it, because not only is it fun, for me at least, to read a book and then immediately watch the adaptation, but since I'm not loving the book and this storyline, it's nice to have like the first half of both the book and the movie behind me at this point. Not that I didn't enjoy it. It's just not my favorite, and I know that's a pretty popular opinion among Hunger Games fans, so I don't feel bad saying that. Okay, I'm just gonna go through the notes that I took while I was watching. So first off, I think the extra scenes of Plutarch and President Coin were a great addition. This is basically the same take that I had for the first movies, where they've just added a few scenes of context that really help us understand what the rest of Panem is going through and just the context of the revolution. We don't get a lot of it, we just get a little bit, and I think it is what's missing from the books. The propo videos that they made, the propaganda videos, made me laugh. I don't think they were supposed to. They were just ridiculous. I wrote the singing and then the cringe emoji. Okay. I'm not a fan of singing in movies when it's like a character singing, you know, within the scene and they're not a singer. Like I have a hard time getting through that. I had the same experience in the first movie when she had to sing, but actually, even though it started out a little uncomfy. It became something that was actually fairly moving. The way that they transitioned it from her just sinking on her own to, you know, everyone joining in and setting that as the background to taking out the dam, that was good. I liked the dam scene and the forest scene. Like, again, just those additional bits of context that we get, I think really add to the story. It took me a while to realize that Effie is featured pretty prominently in this movie, but she's not really in the book. I think she's there in District 13 with them in the book. I'm pretty sure she is, but I really can't remember if she's said anything so far, like if she's been featured at all. I liked that she was a little bit more prominent in this story because she is just like a really funny character. I forgot to mention the addition of the mission scene where Gale and the others are going on their little mission. I thought that was great. That was missing from the book for me as well. That was fun to watch, and I just think they did a pretty good job with it. But overall, this movie was pretty slow. There were a lot of scenes that went on just a little too long, in my opinion. I don't have any like grand or unique takes on this movie or the Hunger Games in general, so I think that's kind of all I have to say. That was just my experience watching it, and I'm looking forward to finishing the book and then watching part 2. I think because part 1 felt like it was setting up part 2, that just makes me more excited to watch part 2. But I also, now that I've rewatched part 1 years after I first watched it as a kid, I don't think the rewatchability is there for part 1 because there just isn't a lot that happens. It's a setup for part 2. That's all I have. I'm starting to get a little bit self-conscious about my opinions and my takes so far. I have fully edited the video up to this point, and I just get a little bit nervous about putting my thoughts about a classic, you know, a well-known story out onto the internet. But look, it's perfectly fine if you disagree with me on anything that I've said, except if you love Gale, then you're wrong. I'm totally kidding. I'm totally kidding. I'm not kidding. I finished it, real or not real. And it destroyed me. I am deceased, much like many of the characters in this book. Too soon, too soon. We are gonna get into this book. I am going to unpack all of my thoughts and feelings. I also watched the movie, so we're gonna get into that. But first, I also finished the top, and I want to tell you all about it. So let me step back a little bit. I like the length. I think it's a good full length on me. I'm wearing it with like some mid-rise black pants, and it just hits me like right before the fullest part of my hips. So I think the length is great. So last I left off, I was talking about how I wasn't sure if I wanted to do the ribbing in black because initially I had all of the finishings in black in my mock-up, and I actually got the striping spot on with the mock-up. I wasn't sure because obviously it's not to scale, but when I started to knit the ribbing in black in real life, I just didn't like it. It looked a little bit weird to me to have the black ribbing so close to the black stripe. So I decided to continue with the color sequence with the white after the gold. And I started knitting the white in 1x1 rib. I knit the full hem, and I knit the rib in combination knitting so that my pearls would be a little bit tighter. It would give me a neater ribbing, especially in this linen yarn. I started the Italian bind off, and I just didn't like it. I just felt like the ribbing was still too sloppy looking. It just wasn't as polished as I wanted it. So I decided to do a folded hem for all of the edgings. And I kept the black here because I just continued with the striping sequence, and I liked the length of the sleeves. I just finished the blue stripe, and then I added the black folded hem, and then same with the neckline. I just did a folded over hem. Before I started the hem, I decreased 1 stitch out of every 10 stitches, so I knit 8 and then I knit 2 together, and that just helps the folded hem not flare out. So you can see that like my hem It's quite drapey, but it doesn't like flare. But it would if I just started the hem. So I definitely recommend doing that if you're gonna do a folded hem. And then what I ended up doing to like finish it off is I picked up the stitches. So I had my live stitches on one needle, and then I picked up the stitches around where I changed colors, and I Kitchener stitched the stitches together. And it took a while. It was a lot of Kitchener stitch. I had to do the neckline. I think I knit it in full 4 times, and I picked up the stitches 6 times because I was going off pattern. So I was just trying things and trying to get the ratio right. When I picked up the stitches, I didn't do any decreasing, but I just made sure to pick up 1 stitch for every stitch, and then 2 out of every 3 rows, like along here where I did the shaping. And I think it ended up being a nice neckline. It lays well, and you know, it doesn't like flare or stick up or anything weird. I didn't add any bust darts or anything. I just followed the pattern, obviously, except for the finishings. But yeah, it's just a nice like saddle shoulder. I think it blocked out nicely. I'm a fan of the way the yarn worked up and how it feels. It's very lightweight. I think it'll be really nice in the summer next year. I think that's all I have to say about it. It was really fun to knit while I read the books, and I have so many memories of the books like knit into this top that I really want to do something like this again. Let's talk about the end of the book. I have a lot of thoughts. I could go on probably forever. I know this video is very long, so I will keep it contained a little bit. First, I want to say I kind of forgot to touch on this with part 1 of Mockingjay, but in the movie, the way that Josh Hutcherson portrays Peeta as being hijacked, and like his costume and his makeup and just the entire way that was portrayed was haunting. It was great. That has really stuck with me while I was watching the movie, and it was interesting to read the second part of the book after having watched part 1 of the movie, because that was just really in my mind and how I was picturing Peeta, and I feel like it really added to my reading experience. Also, just the concept of like a mental hijacking is psychological horror. There's actually a lot of psychological horror throughout the trilogy. I mean, obviously there is the violence and the horror of that, but there are so many mind games throughout the trilogy. The mutations from the Capitol were so freaky. Every single one of them, they could just kind of got like creepier and creepier. This book was so sad. I forgot just how devastating it is. I definitely cried. The final Buttercup scene absolutely broke me. Also, the ending especially made me really excited to get President Snow's backstory. I was already excited to read the other 2 books, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and Sunrise on the Reaping. I'm very excited to dive into those. But yeah, the ending really made me want to know like what went into creating the Hunger Games and controlling Panem, and what were his intentions? How did he go about it? I'm just very curious about all of that. Overall, I would say Mockingjay is still my least favorite of the 3. As far as books, Hunger Games, Catching Fire, then Mockingjay. And as far as movies, I think I liked Catching Fire, the movie, more than the first one. I mean, the first one is really good too. It's hard to rank them. I would say I think I liked part 1 of Mockingjay, the movie, more than part 2, which I wasn't necessarily expecting. I think part 2, the movie, really fell flat for me in a lot of ways. That being said, the books are so much darker than the movies. Obviously, with the books, we get more backstory, we get more descriptions, and so there's more room to go into details, and that does reveal some of the darker aspects that we just don't see in the movies. Some examples are obviously the characters are aged up, or I should say the actors are aged up. And so they look older, and that just is a little bit less jarring. None of the actors really look malnourished. They don't necessarily look impoverished. they look pretty healthy. Whereas in the books, the way Katniss is described, she is very clearly starving. The lack of bodily autonomy for the tributes is less apparent in the movies. In the books specifically, we see that a lot for Katniss. Just off the top of my head, when she is preparing to go into the games, her styling team just does whatever they want to her. She doesn't consent to anything. There are a lot of aspects of different surgeries that they want to give her throughout the trilogy. And there are many times when she is unconscious and the Capitol is just doing things to her body. The entire pregnancy subplot is a little bit more prominent in the books. I didn't even touch on it in this video because there's just so much to discuss. But it was just so frustrating to read. The way that Katniss being pregnant turns her into such a precious and valuable woman to the Capitol, and the Capitol is just so concerned over her fetus when they are happy and excited to watch children fight to the death every year. I mean, come on. I actually loved that that was in there. I wish that it was more explored, but at the same time, it's a YA, so I totally get why it wasn't. Another aspect of the lack of bodily autonomy is that in Catching Fire, again, I didn't touch on this, but it's just really stuck with me. They send in past tributes into the games, and some of those tributes are on Morphling. Morphling in Panem is what you think it is. It's what it sounds like. And so these people are clearly not in their right mind, and they are being sent to their death. That was so fucking dark. And that's explored a little bit more in Mockingjay through Katniss, because she is on Morphling for a large part of the book. I want to talk about the love triangle for a second. I think that this love triangle works in this trilogy because Katniss is not really interested in a love interest. She doesn't have time. She is preoccupied. She's leading a revolution. She's trying to keep her family safe. She's trying to stay alive. And the romantic aspects are there because that's just a part of life, but it's definitely not something that she is focused on. And I just think it works really well, and I am glad that I got to read this as a young teenage girl. That leads me into why I think Gale exists in this story. Obviously, I'm a Gale hater through and through, but he's sort of a foil in a way because he represents Katniss's previous home in District 12. Once she is in the games, everything changes for her. Her entire perspective changes, her life changes. She can't go back to the way she was and the old way that she used to think. So Gale represents her old home that she wants so badly to go back to. But the thing is that Gale doesn't have any of the experience that she has in the Hunger Games. He hasn't seen the Capitol. He has no empathy for any of the people that Katniss has learned to have empathy for, because she is just so much more emotionally complex, emotionally mature, and is able to meet people and kind of understand where they're coming from and actually have empathy for others. Whereas Gale just dismisses all of that. So when she comes home and Gale is there, he is so familiar and she wants that so badly, but it's not quite right because her life has changed forever. Whereas Peeta is there with her throughout the games, and he, I think, is just a much more empathetic character even than Katniss is, but he is representing the much more nuanced emotional response to what has happened. And Gale wants revenge, whereas Peeta wants healing. And once I finished the trilogy, that's when all of that really started to come together for me, and I realized why this love triangle exists and why Gale is even there. It's just such a good series. It really is. And like I said, I'm just really glad that I got to read this as a teenager, and I'm so glad it held up. Not every book from my childhood has held up. And of course, I don't mean that this is perfect and has no flaws or anything to criticize. There are plenty of things to criticize. I'm sure that certain things would have been written differently if it were written today, but it wasn't. It was written back in 2008. And it meant a lot as a young girl to read about another teenage girl who was independent and who stood up for what she believes in, but also was not a perfect character. She didn't do everything right. She was not extremely likable. And ultimately, a lot of the time, she was acting out of self-preservation. And I think that was just very important to see when I was growing up, because I was not empowered and emboldened as a girl. And this trilogy really meant a lot to me back then. Anyway, I'm gonna stop getting sappy. When I first had this idea, I just thought it would be like a fun little thing to do, and it was, but I think I also realized just like how much this trilogy means to me and how much it meant back then as well. Before I get any more earnest on the internet, I'm gonna go. So thank you so much for watching. You made it this far, which is amazing of you. And I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.